Are you getting pressure from finance to justify or reduce your cloud bill? CloudZero is the only cloud cost platform loved by engineers and trusted by finance. CloudZero can identify unused, idle, or over-provisioned resources, alert you to spend anomalies, and organize 100% of your spend into a framework that mirrors your business structure, like cost per customer, product feature, or team. It's the most powerful platform ever built to provide accurate, granular visibility into your total cloud spend without the typical pitfalls of legacy cloud cost management tools like endless tagging or clunky Kubernetes support. Manage cost, optimize development, and maximize profit, all in one platform. Join companies like Rapid7, Drift, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. Visit today to experience immediate and ongoing savings on your cloud bill.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We are getting into the sort of mid-late part of February, almost 2 months down, and hope, again, another Sunday Perspective show. Excited to kind of dive into another sort of interesting topic that I've been thinking about a little bit and starting to see some interesting buzz about over the last few weeks, maybe few months and so forth. And I feel like with this topic, this is another one of these ones that I have to imagine there's a certain amount of folks that listen that are going, boy, I'm getting a little bit tired of you guys talking about sort of the down economy and what's going on when things are sort of bad with the economy. Can you guys just get back to talking about technology? Let's talk about startups. Let's talk about what's new. Let's talk about implementation deals and all those sort of things. And trust me, we would love to dive into those things. But I think we're at a stage, and I think most people are probably running into this where you're having to think about the economy, and you're having to think about what sort of some of the shifts in the economy, whether they're psychological, whether they're actual in terms of how they impact budgets, in terms of how you're prioritizing projects, what you're doing in terms of spending or not spending, or rethinking some things. And I think we have to be sort of realistic about this. We've always said that it's really important to understand in our industry how you follow the money. And the reason we do that is not just because, we feel like talking about the economy or the economics of the industry. I mean, they're incredibly important. But I think it's important to sort of, be paying attention to what's going on with trends, because there's certain things that happen with trends in which, we do get a lot of follow the leader in our industry. We do get a lot of, hey, if you didn't create something, you sort of, jump on a bandwagon or become the other side of a bandwagon. And that happens quite a bit in our industry. And I think we're starting to see sort of an interesting flip I've seen over the last couple of months. And that is, we're starting to see a lot of sort of anti-cloud native, a lot of anti-cloud, a lot of Kubernetes, a lot of developer relations, and a number of things that, have been kind of viewed in a very positive light for the last number of years. And we're now, because, things are starting to flip and starting to tilt and starting to, kind of move in slightly different directions. A lot of people are starting to question whether or not those are still good things, right? So, what I kind of want to dive into today is sort of these 4 things that we've been seeing, a number of opinion pieces and articles being written, sometimes numbers backed, sometimes just opinion based, but really kind of a couple of things. The first is the public cloud still economically viable for IT, for mainstream IT? Second one is, our distributed systems and sort of distributed applications. Are they practical? Did we give up too much in terms of trying to, allow agility and flexibility for developers? Should we be reining that back in a little bit? Third is Kubernetes too difficult to use? Is Kubernetes a mistake? Is Kubernetes, just been 6-7 years of hype that we are going to end up unwinding and unraveling sooner than later? And the last one is around, is developer relations, DevRel, if you will, is that still something that people are interested in? Is it something that companies will invest in? Is it still a viable career path and all those sort of things? So it's been interesting. I've seen a number of articles. I pointed to, a couple of Twitter threads, a couple of articles have been written lately about this. And I'm going to kind of try to dive into most of those topics and kind of why we're seeing this, not maybe whether or not they're right or wrong, but why we're seeing this sort of sudden flip, after the break.
We all know that running global-scale multi-cloud applications is difficult and expensive, but being locked into a single cloud provider sucks. That's why our friends at Section created the platform for easy and cost-effective multi-cloud operations. Section actually makes it easier to operate multi-cloud than on your current single cloud. Applications run in the best locations for end-user performance, reliability, and security, and you get to focus on building your apps, not your infrastructure. Visit section.io/cloudcast to sign up for free with no credit card required. You can be running in under a minute. That's section.io/cloudcast.
It's here, the 6th annual SysDig Cloud Native Security and Container Usage Report. Get real-world, actionable security insights from companies using cloud and containers from industries around the world. For example, did you know that 87% of container images in production include a high or critical vulnerability? That's up from 75% last year. Or do you realize that companies running Kubernetes clusters larger than 1,000 nodes could save over $10 million a year? With deep runtime insights, SysDig delivers cloud and container security so you can stop attacks without wasting time. You can find all the details by downloading your copy of the report for free at sysdig.com/usage report. That's sysdig.com/usage report. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dive into what's starting to feel like an undercurrent, a messaging drumbeat, if you will, kind of, a new line of thinking, kind of a new set of opinions that maybe have been around for a while and sort of got smothered out by, growth in the market or, trends in the market. But now that the market is starting to slow down a little bit, starting to, shift, the upward curves are starting to bend slightly down in different areas. Maybe they're slowing down. We're starting to hear this kind of anti drumbeat to a number of things. And it's interesting because there's probably some truth in some of these things. And again, we put some links in the show notes, but there's also just sort of a natural trend that happens when things slow down, when things shift. And again, we've been doing a lot of these Sunday Perspective shows for folks who maybe haven't been through some of these downturns, haven't been through certain things. And so I want to hit on those things that I talked about at the beginning. Is public cloud still, economically viable? Are distributed systems do they still make sense? Does Kubernetes make any sense? Was it a good thing? Has it been a bad experiment? Whatever we want to think about it. And then we'll think a little bit about sort of, this concept of developer relations and what does it do and does it make sense? And why are we seeing, some people from that industry kind of get, be part of these layoffs and some of these other things. So, I think it's important not to just dive into kind of the individual topics, and we could probably actually do individual shows about a lot of those things. But I think it's often important to remember that there's really a difference between kind of early adopter customers and companies, and what happens when new technologies come out and new paradigms happen versus kind of the bar that has to get the hurdle that has to happen, the bar that has to be met when we get into sort of mainstream adoption, and oftentimes 5 years into something, 10 years into something, and so on and so forth. So, I think the thing that we run into, and I'm going to kind of give some broad topics about why I think some of these things are happening. The first is that early adopters of any specific technology, any new paradigm shift, really oftentimes go in there and they have a very specific problem they're trying to solve, right? This is why, for example, we in the early days of sort of cloud, and the days, go back to, 2010 or whatever it is, 2011, 2012, whatever. So many of the examples that were used were for things like, well, this is how Netflix does it. This is how, some cloud native company does it. And a lot of the sort of pushback was, well, that's not really applicable to my bank. It's not really applicable to my insurance company or my, manufacturing company or whatever it might be. And I think we have a tendency sometimes to, kind of overinflate how much a single technology that made sense for certain sets of use cases can be applicable to everything. Because there have been very few instances in which sort of one thing becomes applicable to kind of everything, right? Aaron loves to sort of beat on this drumbeat, which is like, there are a few things that go away in IT and technology. They just sort of get added to, new stuff gets added to it. And I think if we think about sort of the really mainstream things that have sort of kind of gone everywhere, they're kind of few and far between, right? I mean, we've seen in our last 10 plus years, virtualization, was something that could be applied to really broad swaths of technology. But even that, the early parts of virtualization were very, very important for cost savings. And then the later parts of virtualization, where you were virtualizing a database that still was mostly just running on one machine or an SAP system or something, really was more just, it might not be the most efficient thing, but it does sort of give us consistency, right? We've seen that with like Wi-Fi. Okay, Wi-Fi can be used in all sorts of places. It can be used, in your corporate office. It can be in an airplane. It can be at your house, and it works pretty much. But now, obviously, we're seeing it come back to being problematic. It makes it sometimes difficult to stream 4K in your house or do gaming, or what happens when you have 200 people in a conference room? It kind of falls down, and so we have this tendency to go, okay, new technology, find some early use cases that are very viable. They address legitimate concerns. They have economic viability, whether it's in growing the top line for the business, in helping in profitability, sort of the bottom line of the business, whether it reduces risk, whatever those things are. And then we have a tendency to sort of go, oh, well, could that take over the world? Could that take on everything? And we've seen some instances of this where it became kind of viable, or it became very obvious fairly quickly. Something like serverless technology, in which, wow, really cool. It's going to be completely, you only pay for what you use, and it can be used for a number of things, but it really hasn't taken off for, it can be used for everything, right? Could it be? Yeah, if you bend it and twist it and make it do certain things, but it's a perfect example of like great for certain things, not great for other things. But the question came up quite a bit of like, well, why isn't it being used for everything? Now, Kubernetes is going through that right now. Even the public cloud is sort of going through that right now. Like, can it be used for everything? I think the second thing is we often find that sort of what our near-term goals are and what our long-term goals are oftentimes aren't the same thing. And this, to a lot of folks, is going to seem really obvious, but oftentimes we create some near-term goals, but over the long run, that might not be exactly what we want, right? We may have a situation in the near term in which we need to change what we're doing. It's just not sustainable. But maybe that pace of change that we had to create, the amount of hours that we had to put in to get the people to do the work, or the level of engineer that we needed was great for the near term. But for the long term, it's not sustainable. I can't afford, $1 million engineers, in the Midwest of the United States or in Eastern Europe or something. But maybe we needed some sort of high end to sort of get us over the hump. And we do run into those sort of things as well. Those things happen. The third thing on my list was, the ROI of technology doesn't always happen immediately, right? It's not always obvious what exactly we're going to get from a pure financial benefit out of certain technologies. But sometimes it's very obvious that we have to fix, or we have to try and improve something, and we're actually able to do that fairly quickly with certain technology. And we're able to make developers more productive because of containers. We don't have as many misaligned dependencies. We sort of know that something can get through a pipeline consistently. But in the long run, is that going to give us 30% better developer efficiency? I don't know, right? It might, but it may only really apply to a third of the applications of the portfolio. It may only apply to certain types of things. Maybe it really helps the CI, CD, and QA team the most. It doesn't help developers. And, so those things sort of have to get worked out. In the past, when things weren't changing as much, or we didn't have as many, technologies that we're kind of sorting through, maybe we could sit down and do the math ahead of time and work that out. I have a harder time doing that these days. I think the other thing that's very real was, and we've seen this, is resume-driven development is a real thing in good times. We see centers of excellence at organizations. We see people who, stick around, take on a new project so that they can get that technology in their resume, and they're gone a year later. And we see people bouncing from company to company or technology to technology. That's a real thing in good times, or sort of economically up times, but that doesn't really fly in, difficult times or economically slower times and so forth. And the last couple of things is, the economic downturns very much shine a light on both practicality, does this make sense, and profitability, right? It's, the projects that maybe we could get away with because it was like, well, you don't quite understand why this is good. I don't necessarily, I'm not going to explain it to you. If you don't get it, I don't have to explain it to you. But, we need to be investing in this space because look at what our competitors are doing. Look at what everybody else in the industry is doing. Look, the media is writing about all this stuff. So we do see a certain amount of that happen. And then the last thing, and folks don't love this, because it typically, sort of pits people against dollars, people against capitalism, is that, greed is very much a factor in good times. We see VCs investing a lot of money in things that may or may not necessarily be the most economically viable, but they don't want to miss out on the next big thing. But it's also a factor in bad times, right? I know I just saw a write-up of somebody who, had looked at some of the layoffs that were announced at DigitalOcean and basically said, well, it would have been fine if they had just said, hey, the economics aren't working out for the business and we have to lay some people off. But at the same time, they decided to buy back a whole bunch of shares to boost their share price somewhat artificially. And so, that money could have been used to keep those people around. Well, the purpose of any public company is to, drive returns for the shareholders. And sometimes people get sort of lost in that. So, there's a lot of things that go on that are different between in good times and in bad times. Now, let's talk a little bit about why we're seeing some of these articles written all of a sudden about these various things. The first one I think we're seeing is, is the public cloud economically viable anymore, right? We're seeing so many articles written about not so much repatriation. I think we went through that a little bit last year, the year before. Is there a lot of that? But, should we accelerate those projects that move to the cloud? Why are we seeing so many companies that are in the business of doing cost savings and cost optimization and so forth? Obviously, those businesses don't start if there's not, sort of a push from customers saying like, gosh, I feel like I'm spending too much money. And I think the other side of it is, and Aaron and I have talked about this for a long time, we no longer hear about price cuts, right? So for anybody who's been around for a long time, if you go back to the original couple of AWS reInvent, for example, keynotes, how much price cuts were happening every year on compute and storage was a regular thing. Oh, this is our 47th price cut. This is our 67th price cut. You no longer hear that anymore, right? The cloud is no longer even marketing themselves as being economically more viable than it's simply going, we do all the technology stuff. And so I think there's a lot of companies who are getting their bill. They're realizing the complexity of their bill. They're realizing that, buying things as OpEx versus CapEx and having depreciation associated with them, or, how many projects really need all of the scale of the cloud is making them question that. And so, it's a viable thing. We haven't necessarily seen price cuts be a differentiator between the cloud providers. They've all sort of said, hey, we're gonna stay in lockstep with each other. We're not going to get into a pricing war. So there's some realities to that. Now, whether or not a decade of having done stuff in the cloud can be undone. The mechanisms, the muscle, the tooling, the DNA that's now around, hey, I can just go to the cloud and spin stuff up and start working on things. And, do I really want to operate a database? Do I really want to operate a Kubernetes cluster? Do I really want to operate infrastructure? We're a decade into people going, yeah, maybe I don't. Maybe that's not what we want to do. Maybe that's below the value line. It's undifferentiated heavy lifting, all the buzzwords that we've heard about it. So it's going to be very interesting to see how much the economic shift in this, and people doing viability studies, start to shift some of that away from, hey, put as much as you can in the public cloud to, boy, we got to be much more conscious about that. The second one I think we're seeing is, people starting to say, hey, how practical is it to do, distributed applications? And, this is really kind of one of those ones that, you're going to see some broad brushstrokes. You're going to see some case studies. But, I think this is one probably more than anything that is really use case by use case dependent, company by company, group by group dependent. There are plenty of organizations that have figured out how to do this. Now, does it involve more moving pieces? Does it involve, a little more coordination? Does it involve, kind of doing some reorganization and some rethinking about how stuff does? Yeah, absolutely. Because, building stuff as a distributed thing where you've got more moving pieces, you've got more things that have to be coordinated, more, collaboration that has to happen, more communication that goes on over the network, all those sort of things that are different than a monolithic application. They can be more difficult, but at the same time, If the case works out for it, the use case works out, the business case works out, the agility that you can get from the systems, the ability to decouple certain things from other things, may be absolutely necessary for the business. And so, this is one that we are going to see people question because, you can build business cases that sort of, connect the dots and go, oh, do I need all these, are the engineers too expensive? Are the systems too complicated to troubleshoot? Why are we spending so much on observability and logs and all that kind of stuff? But this is one that, of all the things in the list, is probably going to be the most kind of use case by use case basis. The third one I had on the list, are we going to go back and look at Kubernetes and regret Kubernetes, or is it too complicated? Did it make infrastructure too complicated? Has it not done anything to help developers? And I pointed to a couple of interesting kind of threads and articles that were written. One was written by Michael Cote, who, friend of the show from over on Software to Tie and Talk and sort of all around the internet, talking about Kubernetes has been a 7-year distraction. It really hasn't helped developers. And there's some viability to that, right? Like if you're a developer, whether you used to have to do a bunch of stuff yourself to get an application into production, whether you played around with PaaS systems and you thought, oh, these are awesome, or you're now dealing with Kubernetes and you feel like you're sort of stuck somewhere in between. Yeah, you may kind of look at your world and say, boy, I just wanted to deploy a Java application with the load balancer in front of it and attach it to some storage or some data. Yeah, you may look at this and feel like, boy, it was a big distraction. There's also some arguments now being made that Kubernetes has made the infrastructure too complicated, whether it's storage or networking or, load balancing. How do we do troubleshooting? Again, I think that goes back to, distributed systems are inherently going to be more complicated. There's more moving parts. So if you're looking at it purely as a, hey, should we have used this to replace a bunch of, fairly static VMs? Yeah, it probably is going to look somewhat more complicated. But if you're comparing it to, an environment in which you couldn't do deployments fast enough, you couldn't scale things up and down because you couldn't build automation around it, then it's again an apples to apples comparison. But again, now that the economy is a little softer, the hype around certain things isn't as big as it was before. We don't see as much VC funding day in and day out. We're going to start to see some questions raised about these types of things. And, there are going to be plenty of examples where somebody says, hey, we tried to do Kubernetes and, we found we were only getting 20 or 30%, efficiency of our compute. So therefore, boy, it was a complete waste of time. Okay, sure. Right. If you're not using the technologies, as efficiently as you possibly can, yeah, they may have additional overheads that weren't the most efficient thing in the world. So I think we're going to start to see some more of those articles. And again, I'm not trying to sort of pass judgment on whether they're true or not true. I think you have to sort of look at them on a case by case basis. But again, another one that sort of falls into that category of, hey, is this still what we want to be doing? Is this, we're 5, 6, 7 years into this. Is this the direction we want to be going? And the last one I'm starting to see a little bit of uptick in terms of conversation around and buzz around and so forth is, folks from the DevRel community. I've seen some colleagues and seen some companies decide to sort of disinvest in that role, or some of those people have been laid off and so forth. And so they're starting to go, oh well, boy, everybody talked about developers are the new kingmakers, and many companies thought, well, DevRel was going to be our way of speaking to developers if we want to be part of the. And I think the reality is, and I've talked about this on past shows and so forth, DevRel is one of those things that, tends to be invested in when things are good. And, you have the ability to, afford that sort of role where you're out, engaging with the market. That's not necessarily a marketing or sales role, right? But when times are tougher and people look at the cost of their go-to-market overall, and all the different ways that they can create awareness of the market, influence the market, educate the market, and all those other things, DevRel becomes a less scalable, more human, less digital kind of way of doing that. And again, part of the knock on DevRel has always been their insistence that they are not marketing. They're not part of marketing. They're something else. You don't really understand it. Well, at some point, if you can't explain what it is and you tell people they don't understand it, it becomes a very easy thing for them to go, well, if I don't understand it, but I'm still spending money on it, it becomes easier and easier to sort of go, well, maybe I don't need it. Because if I don't understand it and you can't explain to me what it is, or we're not seeing return on it, we can't put metrics around it. So again, not a knock on DevRel as a whole, but I think, any sort of role in which, people kind of go, well, it's needed, but I can't necessarily explain it, or we're not like the other traditional functions you have, which have their own metrics, their own KPIs, their own measurements, their own return, criteria they have. It does become sort of a vulnerable type of thing. And when things are tight and you're looking to cut back some things, those are areas, regardless if it's tied to DevRel or whether it's tied to spending on some application, SaaS application that maybe you don't need or is sort of a luxury. I think it sort of falls into that category. So again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis where it makes the most sense, where, that type of role fits for the technology that you sell, the market that you're involved with, and so forth. So, I don't think any of these things are sort of binary, black and white. Yes, we need it. No, we don't need it. Yes, this is good. No, it's bad. Yes, this is the future. No, it's, the end is coming in a year or whatever it is. I don't think any of them are in that sort of category. But I do think, we are going to see more and more conversations about it. And, sometimes it's a good thing. I think when the economy gets a little tighter, we do see much more clear-eyed, clear rationale applied to things. Much more discipline is applied to things. People are looking for less pure growth, and they're looking for more profitability. They're looking for more sort of reasoned business numbers, the things that you would learn in typical business school, not, our thing, which has very low growth, is worth 50x the growth of it, or 50x the revenue, or 100x the revenue. We're going to see much more pragmatism come into play. And anytime those things come into play, kind of everything gets questioned. So anyways, I just kind of wanted to talk about the rationale behind why we're now seeing, again, sort of a pushback, a blowback. And the reality is, for some of the people that are pushing on these things, in all fairness, if you go back and look at stuff they've written or, kind of comments they've made, this isn't something new for them. They're not sort of jumping on a bandwagon. They've been kind of trying to say these things for a long time. In other cases, some of the stuff is sort of new to people, and the realities of the economy are starting to sort of set in for, what reality sort of means. So anyways, just kind of want to hit on that. It was, something I've seen, like I said, a spike in over the last month or so of just, kind of the anti-articles to, kind of the growth articles or the, the hype articles over the last 4, 5, 6 years, and some of the trends and so forth. And it'll be interesting to see, as we've said in a lot of these shows, how fast the economy recovers or doesn't recover, but also, how much some of these conversations start to sway people who are are decision makers as to, oh, okay, I need to pay attention to that more than I did a year ago or 2 years ago. So anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up. Hope everybody's doing well. Another Sunday Perspective show. February has been a very good month for us. Again, apologize, as we always do in this time of the year, for both Aaron and I, because the pollen and the allergy season kicks in. Our voice is always going to be a little more hoarse, a little more kind of gravelly, if you will. And I wish there was more we could do about that, but modern medicine only helps so much with sneezing and sinuses and stuff. So thanks for bearing with a little bit of the graveliness of the audio. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the show. Thanks for continuing to listen. And with that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.